My father's hand was already raised when I saw the stranger at the door. My father's hand was already raised when I saw the stranger at the door. He stood in the entryway like a cut of winter itself. Dark coat, still shoulders, eyes that missed nothing. The room behind me smelled of overcooked turkey, wine, and the sour heat of my father's rage. My breath caught in my throat, because I knew in one glance that this was not a neighbor and not a mistake. This was power arriving quietly. "Drop your hand." The voice was calm, but it split the room open. My father turned first in disbelief, then in offense, as if being interrupted in his own house was the greater crime. I kept my face still, though my cheek burned where his fingers had brushed it. The chandelier light trembled above us. My cousins went silent. Even the clock on the wall seemed to stop. My father straightened his shirt and tried to laugh. "This is family business." The stranger looked at him without blinking. Not anymore. I had never seen a man make my father hesitate. For a single second, something in my father's expression changed. Recognition, maybe fear. I did not understand it yet. Only that the stranger had already taken the room from him without touching a thing. Then he said his name. Luca Moretti. It landed like a knife laid gently on a table. My father's jaw tightened. I saw him measure the distance to the front door, the windows, the witnesses, the shame. He had spent years making sure I understood that my voice was small and his was law. But now that law was standing at my doorway wearing expensive silence. Luca's gaze moved to me, and for the first time that evening, I felt seen instead of owned. I did not look away. I could not afford to. My father noticed that too, and his anger deepened into something uglier. "You don't know her," he said. Luca answered without raising his voice. "I know enough." That was when I understood. He had not come here by accident. He knew about the bruises I had beneath my sleeves. He knew about the locked phone, the canceled class, the money my father kept from me, the way every holiday became a trial I was expected to survive in silence. And because he knew, the air around me changed. The shame did not disappear, but it lost some of its power. My father stepped forward. Luca did not move back. "Take one more step," Luca said, "and you will regret it." I heard my own heartbeat, fast and sharp. I should have been afraid of Luca too. Men like him were never safe. But there was a difference between danger and cruelty, and I had spent too long living with the second. My father looked around for support, for an ally, for anyone to restore the balance he had lost. No one moved. Luca reached into his coat and placed an envelope on the hall table. "Inside is proof of what you've hidden. The transfers, the threats, the messages." My father's face drained of color. I stared at the envelope and felt the world tilt. Buried truths had a shape now. It had paper edges, signatures, dates. It had weight. And for the first time, I realized my father's control had not been strength at all. It had been secrecy. "Open it," Lucas said to me. My fingers shook as I touched the seal. My father made a sound I had never heard from him before. Small, desperate, stripped of command. He lunged once, then stopped when Luca's hand shifted under his jacket. Everything in the room froze. I looked at the envelope. I looked at my father. I looked at Luca Moretti, who had turned my humiliation into evidence and my fear into a choice. And in that terrible, silent second, I knew my life had already begun to change. Wind scraped along the porch rails, thin as a blade, while the envelope trembled in my hand. Luca Moretti did not move at first. He stood just beyond the front steps in the cold night air, a dark coat catching the porch light, his face carved into stillness. Richard was breathing hard behind me, furious and cornered, but Luca's eyes never left him. They were not warm eyes. They were the eyes of a man who had learned how fear sounded before it spoke. "Take your hand off her," Luca said. The words were quiet. That made them worse. Richard straightened as if insulted by the calm in Luca's voice. He tried to recover his dignity with volume, with posture, with the old habit of a man who believed his house made him untouchable. But the room had already changed. The silence had moved to the doorway, where Luca stood like a verdict waiting to be read. I could feel my pulse in my throat. I could feel the envelope edge cutting into my palm. I did not understand what Luca wanted yet, only that he had seen enough in one glance to know this was not a family argument. It was something uglier, something buried. Richard said my name like a warning. Luca said nothing at all. Then Luca reached into his coat and held up a single photograph. My father's face drained of color. It was not the picture that mattered most. It was the way Richard looked at it, as if the past had found him first. His mouth opened, then shut. For one terrible second, the man who had filled our house with fear had no words at all. Luca stepped closer, still slow, still controlled. "You were going to hide this forever," he said. "Not tonight." Richard's hands clenched at his sides. I saw anger, yes, but underneath it something sharper, panic. Not because he had been caught in cruelty, but because he had been caught in weakness. That was the truth men like him feared most. I looked down at the envelope seal again, then back at the photograph, and I understood only one thing. Whatever was inside that envelope had already made this bigger than me. Richard took one step toward the door. Luca shifted once, and Richard stopped. "Leave," Luca said. Richard laughed, but it broke halfway through. The sound had no power in it. He looked at me then, and for the first time all evening, he seemed unsure whether he was looking at a daughter or a witness. That uncertainty was its own punishment. I did not speak. I could not. The house had become too small for the truth pressing against it. Luca kept his gaze on Richard, but his next words were for me. "Open it." My fingers tightened. The seal gave way with a soft tear. Inside was a folded page and a name I had never heard before. And suddenly the question was no longer what my father had done. It was who else knew. Rain tapped softly against the window glass, each drop sounding like a warning in the silence of my father's dining room. Richard did not look at me. He looked at Luca as if anger alone could reclaim control, but Luca only stood there with that same dangerous calm, holding the room together by force of will. My fingers were still on the torn envelope, and the page inside felt heavier than paper should have felt. One name, one hidden thread, one truth too large to stay buried. "Put it down," Richard said, his voice tight with humiliation. I almost did. I wanted to. I wanted the night to collapse back into something simple, something familiar, something cruel that I already understood. But Luca's eyes shifted once to the page, then back to me, and in that look was a warning I had not asked for and could not ignore. He knew the shape of fear. He knew how men like my father moved when they were cornered. And he knew this was not only about a family dinner anymore. "Claire," Luca said quietly, "your father did not just hide money." The air changed. I lifted my chin, though my hands were shaking. "Then why are you here?" His answer came without hesitation. "Because he made a deal with people who don't forgive mistakes." Richard rose so fast his chair scraped hard against the floor. "Enough." The sound cracked through the room like a thread, but Luca did not even glance at him. He reached into his coat and placed a second folded paper on the table, slow and deliberate, as if he were laying down a blade. My breath caught. The seal on that page was black, clean, official, not family, not rumor, something colder. Luca tapped it once. "If you open that, you'll understand why your father has been trying to keep you afraid." I stared at the paper, then at him. "I don't need your help. You already have it," he said. That was what made it worse. He was not offering rescue like a charity. He was revealing a pattern, the kind that tightens around a person until every door feels chosen for them. He had followed my father's logic, not his words. He had seen the way Richard controlled with silence, with debt, with shame. And now he was showing me that the control did not end at this table. Richard stepped closer, face pale with fury. "You have no idea what you're touching." Luca finally turned toward him. "I know enough." The words landed like a verdict. Richard froze, not because he had been defeated, but because he understood he had been seen. For the first time that night, his power looked fragile. Mine did too. I snatched the second page before I could stop myself. The room held its breath while I unfolded it. There were dates, initials, and a location connected to my father's name. Buried truths, all of them, lined up in cold black ink. My stomach tightened. This was no longer a question of whether my father had lied. It was whether I was brave enough to learn how deep the lie went. I said no, I whispered. Luca did not move. And I'm still here. That was the danger of him. He was not forcing trust. He was refusing to let fear make the choice for me. Behind him, Richard's jaw tightened with a new kind of panic, the kind that comes when a man realizes he cannot control both the room and the secret. The silence stretched. Then Luca spoke one last time, low and certain. "Read it carefully, Claire. The next name on that page may be the reason your father is terrified of the truth." The room went still. And for the first time, my refusal did not end the threat. It opened a worse one. Rain dragged thin silver lines down the window, and the dining room felt smaller with every breath I took. Luca's folder sat open on the table between us, its edges bent from too many hands and too much fear. Richard had gone rigid in his chair, his knuckles white around the stem of his glass, while my mother kept staring at the paper as if looking away could erase it. I could feel the weight of the room pressing on my ribs, not from anger now, but from something colder, proof. Luca did not raise his voice. He simply slid the top page toward me and tapped one line with a gloved finger. It was not a threat. It was a ledger. Names, dates, signatures, payments. A second page followed, then a third, each one showing how long my father had been feeding lies into the life of this house. Debt, reputation, a private arrangement, my future written down like a bill. Richard tried to speak, but the sound broke before it became a word. You kept this from her, Lucas said, calm as steel. For years. I looked closer, and the truth was worse than cruelty alone. Money had been flowing in and out of my father's hands like a hidden tide. Warnings had been buried under promises. Decisions had been made for me before I ever knew there was a choice. The arrangement was not a rumor or a mistake. It was a cage built slowly, one signature at a time. I reached for the papers, and for the first time, I did not ask permission. My fingers moved fast. I flipped the page, read the dates, found the clause. There it was, the part that tied my name to a future I had never agreed to. My breath caught, and the room seemed to tilt around that single line. Richard lunged to take the folder back, but Luca's hand landed on it first, flat and final. Sit down, Lucas said. Richard froze. That one command changed everything. The man who had ruled this table with silence and fear was suddenly pinned by the truth he had hidden too long. My mother covered her mouth, tears shining in her eyes now, not from surprise alone, but from the shame of understanding. I felt something crack open inside me, rage, grief, and a strange, steady clarity. The debt was not just financial. It was control. It was leverage. It was the price of obedience, and my father had been paying it by sacrificing me. I turned another page and found a second name, one that made Luca's gaze sharpen instantly. For a moment, no one moved. The rain kept tapping the glass. Richard looked at me like I had become a stranger, and Luca's expression told me the secret had widened, not ended. There was another hand in this. Rain pressed hard against the windows as Luca Moretti closed the folder with one slow, deliberate motion. The sound was small, but it cut through the dining room like a verdict. My father had gone pale across the table, his fingers locked around his glass, while the name on the page kept burning in my mind like a match that refused to go out. I had spent years believing fear was the only thing holding our house together. Tonight, I understood it was also a cage. Luca did not raise his voice. He did not need to. You are coming with me, he said, and the words landed with the calm force of a locked door. My father started to protest, but Luca's gaze stopped him cold. I felt the room tighten around me. Every silver fork, every dripping coat, every shadow in the chandelier, turning sharp and unfamiliar. Then Luca looked at me, not like property, not like a bargaining chip, but like someone making room for a choice. That was the first thing in my life that scared me more than my father's anger. I should have said no. I should have gone straight back to the house that had been shrinking my life for years. But I saw the second name again in Luca's folder, and I knew whatever was waiting behind it could swallow me whole if I stayed. So I stood. My chair scraped back. My father's face hardened, as if my silence had finally become a rebellion. Luca only stepped aside and offered me his hand, not touching me, only waiting. For one terrible second, I realized how much trust could feel like a cliff. Choose. The word hung between us, simple and merciless. I took Luca's hand. He led me out through the rain, past the black car idling at the curb, past the men standing like statues under the awning. The city outside looked colder than I remembered, all glass and wet steel and headlights smeared into long white ghosts. I sat in the back seat with my heart hammering so hard it hurt, while Luca took the front and spoke into the dark with the kind of certainty that made dangerous things look orderly. His world was nothing like mine. It was protected, yes, but not clean. Every hallway we entered later smelled of smoke, espresso, and money that had passed through too many hands. Men stepped aside when Luca walked in. Nobody asked questions twice. Nobody laughed. Safety existed here, but it came with knives hidden in the silverware and rules written in silence. He gave me a room for the night. He gave me water, a locked door, and one warning. Do not open it for anyone but me. I stood alone beside the bed, listening to the faint hum of the building, and I hated how relief and dread had arrived together. For the first time, no one was shouting at me. For the first time, no one was dragging me back by the wrist. Yet the quiet felt expensive, bought with something I did not understand. Then a knock came from the corridor below. Not loud, controlled, deliberate. Luca's voice rose once, low and cold. No one enters without my say. My breath caught. Somewhere in this protected world, someone had already noticed me. Thunder rolled over the mansion as the corridor door below opened without a knock. I heard it before I saw it. The measured step of someone who wanted every room to know he had arrived. The rain slapped the glass, the candles trembled on the table, and the silence in the dining room tightened until it felt like a wire around my throat. Luca stood at the head of the room, one hand still on the folder, his face unreadable in the stormlight. Then Richard Bennett stepped into the hall below, his coat damp, his eyes sharp with a cold kind of fury. He did not look surprised to find me here. He looked offended. "Claire," he said, and my name in his mouth sounded like a claim. I could not move at first. The air smelled of wine, wet wool, and danger. Richard's gaze swept past me to Luca, then back again, and something ugly flickered behind his restraint. He had come prepared to fight for control, not to ask for forgiveness. He reached into his inner pocket and drew out a folded document, holding it up like a weapon. "Take her home," he said to Luca. "This is a family matter." Luca did not blink. Not anymore. The words landed like steel. Richard's jaw tightened. He took one step forward, then another, and I saw it in the set of his shoulders. He was no longer trying to negotiate. He was trying to corner me. "You think hiding behind money changes what you are?" he said. "You think one rich man's house makes you untouchable?" My stomach dropped, because that was not all in his hand. Beneath the document was my mother's old photograph, the one I had never seen outside our home, and he held it where I could see it as if he had stolen my past just to keep me afraid. "I found what you've been keeping," he said softly. "And if you do not come with me now, I will make sure everyone else sees it." Luca moved first. He crossed the room in 3 fast steps, his voice low enough to freeze the air. "Put that away." Richard smiled, but it was not a smile at all. It was a warning. Or what? For one terrible second, the room held its breath. Then Richard's phone lit up in his palm, and he spoke one sentence into it without looking away from me. Outside, somewhere beyond the windows, headlights flared in the rain. A vehicle engine growled near the front drive. Security voices rose. Someone was being brought in. My skin went cold. He had not come alone. He had brought pressure, witnesses, and whatever truth he thought could break me fastest. I understood then that he was not here to win an argument. He was here to erase my choice. "Claire," Luca said, and there was no softness in it now. "Stay behind me." Richard's eyes never left mine. "Step outside," he said, "or I send this where it belongs." The room went silent. And in that silence, I realized the next blow was already in motion. The chandelier trembled as the wind pressed against the windows, and the paper in Richard's hand looked suddenly too small to hold the damage he had done. I did not move. Luca stepped forward, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop with him. His face was calm, but the calm was colder than anger. It was the kind that came after patience had already died. Richard lifted his chin as if pride could still shield him, but I saw the flicker in his eyes the instant Luca reached into his coat and placed a thin black folder on the table. "Read it," Luca said. Richard did not touch it. I watched the color drain from his face as Luca slid the folder open with one finger and let the first page catch the light. Bank records, emails, signed transfers. The room did not need an explanation. The evidence spoke in clean, brutal lines. My father's mouth tightened, and for the first time that night, he looked uncertain. "Those are private matters," Richard said. "No," Luca replied. "Those are crimes." The word struck the table harder than any fist. I felt the old fear rise in me, but it was tangled now with something new. Relief, shame, grief. For years, I had been taught to mistake silence for peace, obedience for safety, and humiliation for family. Now I understood that what Richard called control was only fear wearing a tie. Luca turned his head toward me. just enough for me to see the question in his eyes. My hands were cold, but my voice was steady. Yes. Richard laughed once, a dry, broken sound. You think this changes anything? It changes who gets to keep speaking, Lucas said. He reached into the folder again and laid out a second page, then a third. Names. Dates. A hidden transfer tied to public humiliation and another tied to buried truths. Not rumors. Not threats. Proof. Richard stared at the pages as if they had betrayed him personally. Then he looked at me, and I saw the old habit return. The habit of trying to shrink me back into obedience with one look. Claire, come here. I did not. That was the moment the room changed. He had always counted on my silence, on my shame, on my need to make his anger smaller by swallowing my own. But Lucas stepped between us before Richard could say another word, and with one quiet motion, he took the folder from the table and handed it to the man waiting near the door. Send copies to the board, Lucas said, and to the authorities. Richard moved fast then, too fast for a man who believed he was still in command. You wouldn't dare. Luca did not blink. Try me. My father's hand slammed down on the table. Glass jumped. Silverware rang. But no one moved to protect him, and no one answered his rage. Power had met power, and for the first time, his influence had found something it could not intimidate. I looked at the untouched holiday table, at the candles still burning beside the ruined plates, and I understood the shape of the night before me. Richard had come to force me into surrender. Instead, he had revealed the truth of his own hands. The silence that followed was not empty. It was judgment. And as Lucas stayed beside me, I knew the next decision would not be about my father's pride anymore. It would be about what I was finally brave enough to claim for myself. I walked away from the table before anyone could turn judgment back into another cage. The ruined plates still sat in the candlelight, the air heavy with gravy, smoke, and the kind of silence that follows a confession no one can take back. Richard was still standing where Luca had left him, pale and stripped of all the control he had worn like a second skin. For the first time in my life, my father did not look powerful. He looked afraid of being seen clearly. Luca stayed beside me as I crossed the room. Not in front of me, not behind me, beside me. That mattered more than anything Richard had ever controlled. I could feel every eye on us, but I did not lower mine. I picked up my coat from the chair, and my hands did not shake. Claire, Richard said, and his voice finally sounded small. I turned once. You do not get to call that a mercy, I said. He opened his mouth, but the words died there. Whatever he had planned for that night had broken on the floor with the dishes and the lies. Buried truths was no longer buried. Public humiliation had become his own reflection, and for the first time, I understood that leaving was not rebellion. It was survival. Luca touched the door and let it swing open. Cold air spilled in, sharp and clean, washing the room of its heat. He did not ask me to choose him. He asked me to choose myself. Outside, the porch lights glowed over the snow, and the world felt wider than the house I had spent years shrinking inside. I drew one breath, then another. The fear was still there, but it no longer ruled me. I had been raised to believe that endurance was the same as love. Tonight proved otherwise. Richard took one step forward. I stepped back from his reach for the last time. Stop, Lucas said. Richard froze. Not because he had suddenly become kind. Because he had finally met someone stronger than his cruelty. Power against power hung between them in the cold air. And for once, the stronger force was not money or fear. It was truth, and the woman he had tried to break standing on her own feet. I looked back at the house, at the windows glowing like watchful eyes, and I felt nothing but distance. Then I turned away. By morning, my things were packed. Luca had arranged a place where no one would touch me, question me, or decide my life for me. I signed the papers that ended every tie Richard had used to keep me obedient. Each line felt like a door opening. Each signature felt like taking my name back. Richard did not stop me. That was his final loss. And mine was not a loss at all. It was a beginning. Luca met me at the gate, and when he offered his hand, I took it because I wanted to, not because I had to. Behind us, the old house stood silent under the winter sky. Ahead of us was a life I had never been allowed to imagine, and now I was walking into it with my head high. For the first time, I belonged to myself. And that was the moment everything changed forever.